Quilters Newsletter TV, the Quilters community, is brought to you by Handy Quilter, designed by a quilter for quilters, and Husqvarna Viking, keeping the world sewing for over 140 years. Hi, and welcome to Quilters Newsletter TV, the Quilters community. I'm Mary Kate Karr-Petras, and with me today is one of the bona fide rock stars of the quilt world, a quilt celebrity, I would say, David Taylor, quilt artist and teacher. Welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So happy to have you here. I'm sure if you follow at all the quilt competition world, you've seen David's quilts, and behind us hanging on the wall is his most recent show-stopping quilt. Did you wash your beak?
Did you wash your beak?
Did you wash your beak? I mean, the subject matter is adorable.
Thank you.
But the workmanship is really unparalleled. I mean, it's such a pleasure to be able to get up close on these things and not be held back by ropes at a quilt show and just be able to walk right up to it and see just the astounding workmanship that goes into it. But we'll come back to that. Let's start out with talking a little bit about what got you into quilting and the road that got you
Well,
on
it's
this
been
path.
a very strange journey, and it all started because a friend of mine told me, this is what you should do with your life. My friend Madeline Vale, who has her own company, Hummingbird Quilt Studio in Colorado. And back 1998, 1999, she said, I found what you're supposed to do with your life.
And what were you doing at the time?
I was a graphic artist, and I actually worked for newspapers for 20 years as a graphic designer.
And had you ever sewn up to that point?
Oh, yes.
Oh, okay.
I've loved fabric since I was a small child.
Okay.
And my mother sewed, and so we were very poor growing up. And so she sewed all of our clothes, and I would save all of the little scraps of fabric from her trash bin, and always thinking that someday I could make something with those little scraps of fabric.
Mm-hmm. You're a quilter at heart already.
Well, yeah, but my grandma suggested that I try quilting and cutting all those little fabrics into little squares and little triangles and sewing them together. No, it didn't take.
Traditional quilting was not for you.
It was not my thing, and so I said, I'm never going to get into quilting. So it was a shock that now years later, this is what I do every day as quilt.
Well, what was it that made her say that this is what you should be doing with your life?
My friend Madeline?
Yeah.
Well, we had worked together at a fabric store for several years. Neither of us were into quilting at that point. We did apparel work, and I used to do costuming work for the theater and make my own clothes, make my sister's clothes. I made a lot of clothes. Mm-hmm. She moved to Steamboat Springs and joined the local Quilters Guild, and then suggested that I should join the local Quilters Guild, that this is something that I should do. And I remember I went to the first meeting, and I turned around and I left. And she came out and grabbed me and said, where are you going? I said, there's nothing but a bunch of little old ladies in there. I'm in the wrong place. She's like, no, you need to stay, you need to do this. And so for 3 years, I was the newsletter chairperson. Because it did kind of take, because I found this group of people that also loved playing with fabric as much as I did.
Mm-hmm. And so what were the first types of quilts that you made?
Well, little squares and little triangles.
Okay.
And Madeline would give me these little things to do and go, here, go home and practice this. And she designs her own patterns, and she made this little pattern up. She said, go home and sew that together. And I called her after I got it together. I said, honey, there's something wrong with your pattern, because it's supposed to be a 9-inch block, and mine is 9.5 by 10 by 9 1/4 by 8. It doesn't seem to be working. She said, I think that's operator error. And I said, I told you that I can't do this. This quilting thing, it's not for me. But then she introduced me to applique. And we actually started work on this fundraiser quilt for our local chamber music series, the Strings Music Festival. Mm-hmm. And I got us roped into this because I had these connections, and so we agreed that we would make them this quilt that they could auction off to raise money. And I had to learn how to machine applique, and I had to learn how to quilt, and I had to learn how to piece properly, and I had to learn how to pick all the right fabrics. And so with Madeline's guidance, we got this quilt done, and it sold at auction for $25,000. Wow. That was my first quilt project. So I decided there might be something to this whole quilting thing, and that's what got me started. But I fell in love with applique.
Yes, and that's and you mentioned that you learned how to do machine applique, but now you hand applique.
Now I hand applique.
And so how did you learn how to do that? Or
One day, I was working on a project, and it was actually a columbine flower. That was going to be my new design. And what Madeline taught me with the machine applique is you glue all the edges down, and then put that in the machine and do the little blind hem stitch. And I thought, there's got to be an easier way to do applique. I'll do it by hand. Which it's not.
well, it's just so
but-
funny because a lot of people start out with hand applique and they think
God,
there's
yeah.
got to be an easier way than this, and they
Exactly.
go to machine.
But I sat down in my studio at home, and I taught myself my own applique stitch, which is what I still use today. It seems to work for me.
Seems to.
Might not be
Yes.
the world's best approved applique stitch, but it works. It works for me, and that's what I teach my students now. And the results, I think, speak for themselves.
Yes, you've made many quilts and many award-winning quilts, as I mentioned. I mean, it's not an understatement to say that you've really taken the quilt world, not by storm. You really made a name for
It's been
yourself
very
in a
gratifying.
short period of time, because you started quilting in what year?
That was 2000 when we did the
Okay.
quilt for the strings, and I entered my first major competition, which was the Houston International Quilt Festival. That was in 2004.
So just 4 years later, you were entering
I got into
Houston.
that show. I had 2 quilts in that show. I didn't win any ribbons yet. That didn't happen until 2006, when I won the Master Award for Contemporary Quilting, one of their top prizes in the world, 6 years after I started quilting for my piece called Sally at the
Don't
Window.
worry, you're not making me feel bad or anything like that.
Pretty much, if I do a quilt, I'm winning awards somewhere, and it is very gratifying to me. I make my quilts for myself because I want to make them, and for some reason, since I work from photographs, first the photo speaks to me, and there's something about that photo that tells me I want to turn that into a quilt. Because for me, it's all about the process of making the quilt. I design the pattern, and then I choose all the fabrics, and then I do all the stitching, and then I do all the quilting, and then I enter it in a show, and it wins a big prize, and then I sell it, and then I do another one. It's all
How many
about
at a
the
time do you
journey.
have in
One.
Just one at a time.
I can't focus very well. I cannot multitask.
But you're very busy because you also teach.
I teach.
So it's not like you're just at home quilting.
I remember when I won the Master Award in Houston in 2006, and Kim DeCoste, who's head of the education department, came to me and said, "Are you interested in teaching?" I said, "Teaching what?" They're going, "Teaching what you do." I said, "Oh, no, I just do this for fun. No, I don't think I could ever become a quilting teacher." And then in 2009, they asked me again,
Yeah.
and I quit my last job, and I started teaching, and I've been busy ever since.
And by busy, how many weeks out of the year are you teaching?
Oh, I try not to think about it, but I work about 3 weeks a month,
Okay.
and I take 2 months
And that's on the
off.
road.
On the road.
Yeah.
I'm on the road. I travel all over the world now. I'm going back to Australia again in 2014. 2015, I'll be in New Zealand teaching again. I go to France. I teach all over the country. People invite me, and I come and I do my thing.
And your thing is not a quick, it's not
Oh,
a quick
no.
1 day, 3-hour workshop.
No, I can do those at a festival, but I prefer to do my week-long, I call them either an applique escape or an extended workshop, and I walk students through my entire process.
So let's talk about your process. And it starts with a photograph.
Starts with a photo, and if you are lucky enough to take one of my workshops, because they sell out pretty fast, I need to approve the photo, because I'm looking for a simple subject matter that tells a story, just like my birds. There's a whole story in that quilt about the mama bird feeding that little baby bird, and how he's grabbing after that worm, and she's pulling back going, "Excuse me,
Right.
young man, have you washed your beak yet?" So there's a whole story that I can invent when I look at a photo. And that's what I think makes the best subject matter. But I want it to be simple, because then on the first day, we draw a pattern. And the pattern drawing for me is very simple, because how I differ from most applique artists is I draw my patterns by structure, not by color. It's all done structurally, where the beak is, where the eye is, where the feathers are, where the wing is, where the feet are. Because when I add the fabric, all of the detail and all of the color is going to happen in the fabric. So let's say I need a fabric that goes from orange to cream. I know somewhere in my stash, I have a fabric that's going to go from orange to cream. If it's black with purple polka dots and that's what I need, I know somewhere I have that fabric. Because that's my greatest addiction, is buying fabric.
Right. How big is your stash? How many rooms does it take? See how I jumped immediately to rooms and not closets?
It takes an entire room for my fabric stash. And of course, I have to wash my fabric.
You pre-wash? Okay.
Well, before I pre-wash, I have to serge it.
Oh, okay.
Because I'm very meticulous.
Yes.
I can't stand seeing all those raw edges.
Okay.
So I actually serge every piece of fabric when it comes home. If it's a fat quarter, all 3 edges get serged.
Okay.
Then it goes in the washer, then it goes in the dryer for 7 minutes, and then it comes out, and then I iron it, and then it all gets folded to the exact same size, and then they go on the shelves in color order. So let's say I'm working on my birds and I need some dark browns. I'll go get the dark brown stash out and pull all those fabrics. I always consider my process very organic, where I don't lay out my fabrics in the color wheel. I don't get a reducing glass and find the values and separate them by value. I make a huge pile on the table, and I just start pawing through it, looking for the right fabric to do the job that it needs to do. Sometimes you guess right, sometimes you guess wrong. You just recut it. So that process takes the longest for me to do. I would say probably 2 months to 10 weeks just to choose every little piece of fabric.
Wow.
That's
a long time.
Which is why I need to do it in a 5-day class.
Right.
And there I have my students maybe will spend 3 days just picking fabric. So they'll make some progress, but it won't be done by any means, because then I have to do all the stitching. And the stitching takes me probably 6 to 8 weeks to get all the pieces stitched down. And then I quilt it on my Handy Quilter Sweet 16, and then I put it in a show.
So considering how busy you are with teaching, how many quilts a year do you manage to make?
Oh, about 1.
1?
Before I became a quilt teacher, I could make 6 to 8 a year.
Sure.
And then with my teaching schedule, which I do love teaching, I do love making my quilts more, then now I can do about 1 a year, sometimes 2, and then they'll go off to a show. And that's the hard part about traveling, is I have no quilts to bring with me when I go anywhere. Because if they're not hanging in a show, it means that I've sold them. Because I am a working artist, and I do sell all my work. And it's very gratifying to me that my work sells pretty much as fast as I can make it. The piece right before this one, which I finished in December of 2012, has already sold and found a home somewhere in the country.
So how many of your quilts do you have at your own home?
Right now I only own 3. I have my birds, which are about to go to another show.
Yeah.
I have a quilt called Maynard, which is the back end of a bulldog. And I have my...
Yes, I know that one.
and my kitty quilt called the Century of Santorini Island.
Okay.
Those are the only 3 that I own.
I guess it's a good problem to have because your work is in demand and it's popular and people love it. So
it's a good feeling.
Well, thank you so much for coming
Oh,
today.
thank you.
And this is really beautiful work that you do. And like I said, the workmanship is really exquisite and inspiring and a little daunting. And we'd love to have you back sometime if ever possible. So anytime.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope to see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.
Quilters Newsletter TV, the Quilters community, is brought to you by Handy Quilter, designed by a quilter for quilters, and Husqvarna Viking, keeping the world sewing for over 140 years.